Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. Before we begin our meeting, we're going to start this evening with our swearing-in ceremony of new and re-elected board members. And I'd like to thank Ms. Claudia Weber, our town clerk, for being here tonight with us to conduct the swearing-in ceremony. And with that, we'll turn it over to Ms. Weber to begin our ceremony. Thank you.
Good evening. Am I on? That's right. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I congratulate all the newly elected Board of Education members. And I'm going to call your name one by one. If you would come up, please. Erica Schwedel, you're first. You just want to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Erica Schwedel,
I, Erica Schwedel,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
so long as I continue
so long as I continue
a citizen thereof,
a citizen thereof,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
according to law,
according to law,
the duties of a member of the Board of Education
the duties of a member of the Board of Education
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here, you have to sign. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, Julie Toll, please. Same routine.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I, Julie Toll,
I, Julie Toll,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
so long as I continue
so long as I continue
a citizen thereof,
a citizen thereof,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
according to law,
according to law,
the duties as a Board of Education member
the duties as a Board of Education member
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank
I don't know
you.
how to shake hands or not.
Thanks, Claudia.
Okay, sign here, sign. Congratulations. Okay, who's next? Oh, Phil Hogan. Okay, raise your right hand, repeat after me. Oh. I, Phil Hogan,
I, Phil Hogan,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
so long as I continue
so long as I continue
a citizen thereof,
a citizen thereof,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
according to law,
according to law,
the duties as a Board of Education member
the duties as a Board of Education member
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sign, please. Thank you. Thanks. Dan Bennett. I should say Mr. Bennett. Sorry. Thank you. Ready? Okay. I, Dan Bennett,
I, Dan Bennett,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
so long as I continue
so long as I continue
a citizen thereof,
a citizen thereof,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
according to law,
according to law,
the duties as a Board of Education member
the duties as a Board of Education member
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations. Would you
Thank
sign?
you. Yep.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Hugo Alves next, please. Everybody? Yeah.
Hi.
Okay. So, after me. I, Hugo Alves,
I, Hugo Alves,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
so long as I continue
so long as I continue
a citizen thereof,
a citizen thereof,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
according to law,
according to law,
the duties of a Board of Education member
the duties of a Board of Education member
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. And Katrina Parkhill, please. I think we've done this before. Okay, raise your right hand. I, Katrina Parkhill,
I, Katrina Parkhill,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
and the Constitution of the State of Connecticut,
so long as I continue
so long as I continue
a citizen thereof,
a citizen thereof,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
and that I will faithfully discharge,
according to law,
according to law,
the duties as of a member of the Board of Education
the duties as a member of the Board of Education
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Anna.
buddy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Congratulations to all of you. That concludes my part of the ceremony.
Thank you, Claudia. If the newly sworn-in board members would like to take a moment to take a picture with their families who are here, you can certainly do that. It's okay. They're so cute. The best backdrop of any swearing-in ceremony ever, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Oh, where? Right here?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Take all the kids.
The first selectman sends his regrets. He's unable to make it tonight, so he's asked me to officiate over the organizational meeting. So, board is fully present. So I'll first call is for nominations for the chair of the Board of Education.
So, yeah, first, I'd like to make a motion to suspend for 1 year the bylaw limiting the term of the chair, Board of Ed chair.
Is there a second? Discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, unanimous?
To yourself.
Okay. Okay,
Okay,
unanimous.
And then next, I'd like to, thank Katrina for stepping up, and I would, like to nominate Katrina for Chair of the Board of Ed.
Is there a second? Brendan?
I would just note, as I have in the past, that Katrina's leadership, particularly over the last 18 months or so, but over the last 2 years, has been truly extraordinary. The number of hours, dedication that she's put into the Board of Ed is light years beyond what anyone else on the Board of Ed has done. It's just been invaluable to our town and our public schools. So I thank her for that and wholeheartedly support her nomination.
Any other nominations? Okay, nominations closed. All in favor of Katrina Parkhill as Chair of the Board of Education? That is unanimous. You can humbly vote for yourself. Great. Lisa's here, so that is unanimous. Yep. Next is a call for nominations for the position of Vice Chair of the Board.
I'd like to make a nomination.
Penny?
I'd like to nominate Brendan Hayes. He's been on the board for 6 years. He's helped shepherd through 6 budgets. He's been chair, he's been vice chair, he's been incredibly value-added member of the board. I think he'd be a terrific vice chair.
Is there a second? Katrina?
And I would just echo my support. Brendan's been a great partner and a great champion for the Board of Education, and his work has been greatly appreciated over all these years, so I second.
Other nominations? Okay. Nominations are closed. All in favor of Brendan Hayes as the Vice Chair of the Board of Education?
You can vote for yourself.
Good. It'll be unanimous if you do. Okay. Unanimous. Great. And our third call is for nominations for Secretary of the Board of Education. Have any nominations from the floor? Katrina?
I would like to nominate Dan Bennett to be the Secretary of the Board of Education. Dan is a new member of the board, but has been eager to learn and get involved, and I think he will make a great addition to the executive team as we move forward this year with our new board.
Is there a second? Erica? Okay. Other nominations? Okay. Nominations closed. All in favor of Dan Bennett as the Secretary of the Board of Education? Lisa? Unanimous. Great. Congratulations, everybody. Thank you. And with that, I give you this.
Thank you. They won't need to use it. All right. Thank you, everyone. And with that, I will call to order the November 22nd meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education. First on our agenda tonight is to approve our minutes from November 1st, and I think there will only be a few of us able to approve those minutes. So is there a motion? Brendan, second. Bob, all in favor? Okay, Penny, Bob, Brendan.
Yep.
In favor.
Unanimous of those voting.
Yep. Okay. Next is to review and approve this evening's agenda. Is there a motion? Brendan, second. Bob, all in favor? Okay. And moving on to comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, the board has set aside time during the meeting for public comments. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to each subject. Is there anyone wishing to address the board this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to reports and recognition. So tonight, our presentation this evening is from Dr. Carenti on elementary data, student data. Dr. Leslie, do you have anything to add before we turn it over to Dr. Carenti?
Oh, goodness. Sure. As Dr. Carenti is getting ready, just to share in 2020, when the schools were closed due to COVID, one of the, I think, wise moves that the state made, and that happened really nationally, was the suspension of standardized testing for that year. The students were in a very difficult situation. We all were, a lot of unpredictable things happening and what have you. So as we went into the 2021 school year, we weren't sure sort of what would happen with our standardized testing and other pieces. But we did go forward with that, and I think that it was the right move in hindsight. At the time, I wasn't thrilled in some ways because felt like we were still doing so much to keep the schools open and really prioritizing the health and safety of students and welfare. But we did go forward with it as the state was required to do, and I'm thrilled Dr. Krentz here to share the results of that, and to, so we don't have the results from last year as you're looking at it, but I know Dr. Krentz will explain all of that and how we're looking at it all, so it's all yours.
Well, thank you all for having me here this evening, and welcome to all the new board members. I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you and to working collaboratively with you throughout the next few years. So tonight I am here to address student assessments for students in grades 3 through 8. Like Brian said, we'll be talking a little bit about our standardized assessments this year, but before I begin talking about standardized assessments, I do want to take a moment to introduce our district leadership team. So up here on the screen is our K through 12 district curriculum leaders, and tonight we have many of them here this evening. And I'm just going to introduce those people that are here. Maybe y'all can give a little wave. Kathy Grimes, who is our K4 reading coordinator. Karen Scalzo, who's our writing coordinator for grades K5. Sarah Bross, who's our ELA coordinator for 5-8. Nicole Graham, who's our math coordinator, K8. Melinda Meyer, who's our science coordinator, K8. Mary Hanna, who's our social studies coordinator, K8. Jonathan Adams, who is our health coordinator, K8, but also our dean of students over at Saks for lower division. We also have Susan Bliss, our student support coordinator, here this evening. We're also delighted to have a few of our administrators here this evening, so I'm going to take a moment to introduce them as well. From South School, we have Matt Kasich, our principal. Our assistant principal, Zoe Robinson from South School. We have our principal, Chris Wallach from East School. Our principal, Jan Murphy from West School. We have our principal, David Gussage from Saks Middle School. And we have one of our assistant principals who happens to be a grade 8 assistant principal this year, Julie Fiera. I don't think I missed anybody, correct? No. So thank you for allowing me to introduce them. You will have an opportunity to get to know them closely. They do come to several Board of Ed meetings to do presentations for all of you on curriculum and certainly courses that we'll be taking. You're lucky tonight because we're only doing one assessment presentation. We originally had 2 scheduled for the evening last week. Mr. Egan will be here next Board of Ed meeting to do the presentation on grades 9 through 12. But I'm really happy to be working alongside these people that are sitting behind me. They are truly content experts who really stay current on best practices and design wonderful learning opportunities for all of our students here in the district. They lead curriculum writing, professional learning, assessment design, data teams, and assist with coaching teachers and instruction. We are so fortunate to have these people leading our curriculum instruction and assessment in our district. So thank you. As we begin to talk about assessment, assessment is the ultimate purpose of assessment is to support and enhance student learning. It is multifaceted and it should be used to really drive the instruction that we do day to day in classrooms. Assessments are both standardized and non-standardized. And tonight I'll be presenting an overview of the standardized assessment results, specifically known as Smarter Balanced or Next Generation Assessment, Science Assessment. So by federal and state law, we are required to universally assess our students yearly in English language arts and mathematics in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. We must also assess our students in science in grades 5, 8, and once again in high school. Annual state testing is intended to describe student achievement and growth as part of program evaluation and school, district, and state accountability systems. It's also intended to provide an annual snapshot of student achievement. However, when we're looking at this snapshot, we must always remember that we must triangulate our data and look at our district assessments, especially when we're making educational decisions about our students. Annual state testing is not a substitute for other ways in which student learning is assessed. Student learning must be assessed in a variety of fashions throughout a school year. We use district assessments, we use student portfolios, we progress monitor our students, we use teacher observations, we have universal screenings, we have unit assessments, diagnostic assessment, performance-based assessments. We have a wide variety of ways that we assess our students, and that assessment is ultimately what's used to drive the instruction in a classroom on a day-to-day basis. So when we look at our annual state testing that we're required to do by law, we have 3 different assessments that we administer. The Smarter Balanced Assessment is in English Language Arts and in mathematics, and it's administered to students yearly in grades 3 through 8. We also have the Next Generation Science Assessment, and the Science Assessment is administered to students in grades 5, 8, and 11. And then we have one more additional assessment at high school, which is the Connecticut SAT, which is the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and that is also administered to all students in grade 11. We have one assessment that we use for students who might have a cognitive disability, and that is called the Connecticut Alternative Assessment. And these students, through an individual education plan, have been identified to take a different assessment than the Smarter Balanced. It's a very small percentage of our students. All the other students in our district take the actual Smarter Balanced assessment. So the state publishes an assessment calendar every year. This is the assessment calendar that we'll be following for the calendar year 2022. And you can see that the state will give you a window in which you can assess the students. And so they designed that window very unlike our old assessments in the state of Connecticut, where you had 1 week to give them, and you had to give the writing prompt on a certain day. Everybody had to open that writing prompt, deliver that writing prompt, and that was the only day that you could give it. Now that it's a computer-based assessment, we're able to expand that window and give it to students during that window time period. That window is appropriate for us because of all the technology that's required to use to give this test to students. We've become very fortunate in the district because we do have one-to-one devices now. That's a perk of COVID. And so all of our students in grades 3 through 8 have a Chromebook that they actually will take the assessment on. So we load a secure browser, it gets pushed out, they go into that secure browser, and then they're able to take the Smarter Balanced assessment right on the computer that they use every single day in their classroom. It's opened up a lot of windows of how we administer the test. The Smarter Balanced assessment is really 2 days of an English Language Arts, 2 days of a math assessment, and then 1 day of science if you're in grades 5 or 8. We don't run the assessment all day long. It usually takes about an hour, although the kids are given an untimed amount to take the test. So they can take a couple days, they can take 3 days if need be, and it's nice because we're able to pace that out. This year, we have the Connecticut SAT, and unlike in years in the past, this year you're going to see a window. They have decided that the Connecticut SAT will be digital. So the window that we can give it to our students this year is March 23rd through the 25th and the 29th through the 30th. They've given that window to us because, unlike the paper pencil test, they're saying that we can administer it to kids on different days. We don't have to administer the SAT to all 11th graders on the same day. However, we do need to remember that it's a 4-hour assessment and the building has to remain quiet. And unlike the one-to-one devices that we have for 3rd grade, the high school students cannot use their own device. they have to use a district-owned device because it has to go into a secure browser and has to be locked down. So we're going to have to do some planning because in years past, when we've given the next generation science assessment to juniors, we've had carts of laptops that we've brought over to the high school to utilize. Last year, when we gave the next generation science assessment to our juniors, we gave it on different days, and we used their science blocks of time, and we used our labs, and we used some other devices that weren't actually being used at our elementary schools at the time because we had shut down our computer lab and libraries. So we still have to kind of figure out how we're going to go about delivering that SAT, but that's the window that we'll be giving it to. And then I've already spoke a little bit about the science assessment, which is also computer-based. And then we also have a window for the alternative assessments that we give. So the Smarter Balanced Assessment, it's computer adaptive. It contains a variety of item types, such as multiple choice and open-ended responses. In mathematics, in addition to taking the computer adaptive portion, they also take a performance task. The performance task is designed to provide students with an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to apply their knowledge and higher order thinking skills to explore and analyze complex and real world scenarios. So when we look at the Smarter Balanced Assessment in English Language Arts, there are 4 areas of knowledge and skills measured. We have reading, writing, listening, and research. So students will show that they can read and understand a variety of complex, grade-appropriate information and literary texts. They must use evidence to support their ideas in written responses at every single grade level. They must produce effective writing for a range of purposes. They interpret and use information delivered orally to determine main ideas, summarize, or analyze. And then they also have a research where they will research a topic and use the findings to take a position. So when we look at that, it's so fascinating because we've seen actually an increase this past year in our listening. So I think that the remote has had some benefits with our students in the listening portion of the Smarter Balance. In years past, that's been an area that we've always struggled in, but I think with the technology and just how they're used to listening to lessons that have been delivered. So just interesting as we're going through this. So here's just an example of a Smarter Balanced question that comes from a grade 5 ELA. And so in this case, they're asked to read a passage, and then there's some questions that go along with the passage. And in this example, the student must go back and read the passage to determine what the word means in context, and then use evidence to support their answer. It's very interesting because when we see questions like this, we actually see very similar questions to the redesign of the SAT, which happened about 3 years ago. They redesigned the SAT, and it's all completely aligned to the Connecticut core standards, so our Common Core standards. In mathematics, there's also 4 areas of knowledge and skill that are measured. We have our concepts and procedures, our problem solving, our modeling and data analysis, and our communicating and reasoning. And students will explain and use mathematics to solve a wide variety of problems. They'll complete math problems quickly and accurately. They'll apply their mathematical knowledge to solve real-world problems, and then they're required to also communicate their mathematical reasoning. And here's just another example of a question from a 5th grade assessment where they're asked to drag a number into each of the boxes to make the statement true. So in this case, they have to apply what they know about fractions to solve the problem. So as you can see that in addition to being on the computer, kids also need to learn a variety of different skills to manipulate how they have to drag those numbers over. Sometimes they have to use a Desmo calculator. There's a variety of tools that they're taught in order to be able to take the test electronically. So when students receive the results or when parents receive the results, they're done in levels. And so there are 4 different levels, with 4 being the highest. So level 1 is saying that they don't meet the achievement level. Level 2 is approaching the achievement level expected. Level 3, it meets the achievement, and Level 4, it exceeds the achievement. So we look to see that most of our kids are performing at Level 3 and 4. That's what we work very hard to strive. The students are also given vertical scaled scores in each of their subject area, and the vertical scale scores are reported in the thousands, and the vertical scale scores are used to track growth from year to year. And then in addition to the scoring of a certain level, they also get scores in 3 different categories in each of those content areas. So here's just an example of what they would receive in the area of reading. And so it would tell them whether they're below standard, approaching that standard, or above that standard. So the students take the assessment in the spring. We usually get the results late summer, early fall, and then usually the reports come in the mail to us. We sort them by schools, and then they get mailed off to the parents. So it's usually in the month of September that we mail off these results to parents. So this is just an example of what the report would look like that a parent would receive. And that what the students will receive is an overall scaled score in both math and also in ELA. And the scaled scored range is from 2,200 to 2,800. And it's the scale score that allows us to track growth from year to year. So unfortunately, since we didn't take the Smarter Balanced assessment in 2020, we're not able to do that growth over 1 year, because you might have kids who didn't take the Smarter Balanced at all, or you might have kids who took the Smarter Balanced as a 3rd grader, didn't take it as a 4th grader, and then took it as a 5th grader. So the gap year is not allowing us to track that growth over time. And so for many, this was kind of a baseline. So it was kind of a reset for all of us, giving us a baseline, where are the kids? Once again, it's just one snapshot of how our students are performing. I've seen this chart, and I know this has been shared several times, but I thought it was worth sharing again. Just it gives you a perspective of what our current students are going through, what their last normal school year was. So when you look at our kindergartners and our 1st and 2nd graders, they've never really had a normal school year. And then when you look at our 9th graders, their last normal school year was 6th grade. So things have been very different for our students during this pandemic. And I think it's important, as we talk through the data, you'll see how this has had an impact in how we've designed some of our curriculum, and how we've had to map some of our courses, and how we've had to adjust what we've been doing for our students. This is also very important as we begin to look at the data, because the state of Connecticut really struggled on how they were going to report out the results from 2021. Every school district was doing something different with their students. We had students who were in districts that were hybrid. We had students that were in districts that were fully remote. We had districts that were fully in person. So we were actually tracking our attendance throughout the course of the year, and we were reporting our attendance to the State Department of Ed so that they could track what different districts were doing throughout the course of the state. And so what the state did was they decided to then take this data and they sorted it into 3 different categories. And so the first category was the fully, mostly in person. So that meant that more than 75% of the membership days were in person. So as you can imagine, in New Canaan, we had a large percentage of our kids that chose to be in person at school for 75 membership days, so that they were here in person doing that learning. So most of our 3rd grade through 8th grade data, when you look at the spreadsheets, is going to be reported for that in-person data. There will be other districts that you'll look at that will have hybrid data. And that meant that 25 to 75% membership days were in person. So as you remember, last year, we started our school year in hybrid. So the kids maybe came on Monday, Wednesday, or they came on Thursday, Friday, and they were remote at home. And some of the districts did that for an extended period of time. You'll also see, as we dive into the data, that some of the districts did it for extended period of times at different grade levels. So they might have had their middle school that was sitting in hybrid, but their elementary schools were in person, or their high schools were in hybrid and their elementary and middle school were in person. And then there were other districts that had mostly remote data, and that meant that less than 25% of that membership days were in person. So this year, when you look at the data, it's really messy. So normally you can go off to this public site called EdSite, and all the data is nice and neatly organized for you, and you can do all sorts of searches and all sorts of comparisons. And unfortunately, this is just one little snapshot of the very, very large spreadsheet that the state of Connecticut has published. It is on the state website. Anybody could pull this up and look at it. But as you're looking at it, you can imagine how messy it would be. You're going to have all school districts are reported, and then you have schools that are reported, then you have grade levels that are reported. So the spreadsheet becomes very messy when you're looking at it. And you'll have, when you look at New Canaan, the majority of the data is sitting within that fully in-person data. When you look at other schools, it could really be spread out. You could have 50% of it was in person, 40% of it was hybrid, 5% was remote. So it's all spread out across. So I looked at the ELA data. We're going to start with the big picture as we draw into our numbers, just to give you a perspective of what we do. So we always start with the big picture. In ELA, 85.5% of our 3rd through 8th graders met or exceeded the achievement level of 3 or 4. This is a slight dip from 2019, but it's to be expected. So I can't stand here and say that learning wasn't interrupted. Learning was interrupted. We had a pandemic, so we had 4 months of our students in remote. We had time last year where our kids were in hybrid. We had kids in quarantine. We had teachers in quarantine. We had classes being taught remotely. So yes, learning was impacted. Even the half days impacted learning for our students because we were taking away instructional hours. So things had to be adjusted for our students throughout the course of the year. But we're still pretty proud that 85.5% of our students were achieved at a level 3 or 4. So then next, we dive into our grade level results, and we take a look at the grade levels because it's important. We see the big picture of how all 3rd through 8th graders did, and then now we dive into the grade level results. And so we take a look at each of the grade levels. And this is really complicated to compare because you have to remember we have a gap year. So you're not going to be looking at matched cohorts when you're looking at this data. So you can't look at the 3rd grade data from 2019 and then look at it and say, oh, and that's how they performed as 4th graders because there's a gap year there. And so we have to really look at your 3rd graders. It would be how they performed as 5th graders because of the gap year there. So that's just one snapshot. After we take a look at that grade level data, what I don't have here in the presentation is we dive into class data. So at the school level, the coordinators and all the administrators work collaboratively, and then we dive into how did a class perform, and then from there, how did a particular student perform. So we really take a look at the individual students when we're analyzing these data because the data has to be triangulated. So especially this year, there's so many different stories about every single student. So you might have a student who maybe didn't perform so well, but you look back at their attendance, they were in quarantine a significant amount of time. But then you look at their district assessments, and their district assessments look very solid, or their NWEA data, or other data that we have on our students. So we're constantly triangulating that data to make sense of it and to do what's best for our kids. We're also able to look at the results by level. So here's just a snapshot of the different grade levels and how they performed. And the blue represents level 4, green represents level 3, yellow represents level 2, and brown represents the level 1. And certainly when we're looking at this data, we're always looking at those individuals. We're taking a very close look at the students who performed in that level 1 or level 2 area to try to figure out what may have happened and how we can work with them to help them to achieve. I think it's also important to look that we still had a high percentage of kids that exceeded that standard. So when you look at those third graders, we had 66% of our third graders who actually performed at a level 4 in English language arts, which is really talking about probably the instruction that they were receiving despite that there was a pandemic going on. So as I stated earlier, normally we always like to share data from like communities because it gives you a perspective of how we did within our DIRG. And our DIRG is our district reference group. And right here represents our DIRG. This is the district reference group that we're always compared to. So we really want to caution when we're looking at this data. But I also thought it was important to just give you a perspective of how we performed in relationship to other communities within our DIRG. It's also important to note that there's a hybrid. So when you look at the data from Wilton, all of their data is in hybrid. So it's not the same apples to apples when you're comparing data because the rest of those were numbers that were reported for fully in person, and that data was reported for their hybrid data. So we're always very cautious because every district has their own story as they move through last year. And then this is our ELA data as we take a look at it per grade level. And so we're able to take a close look at it. We performed exceptionally well throughout the DIRG with only probably 2 grade levels that maybe dipped into the second. But once again, when you look at those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, a good majority of those districts have asterisks because they spent a good majority of their time in hybrid. So we follow the same exact process in math. And I think that it's well known that math is probably the area that took the biggest hit nationally and within the state of Connecticut, and certainly it is one of the areas that was impacted a little bit more than our ELA scores. We'll talk a little bit about why that might happen. And then we also dive into that data once again by grade level, and we take a look at the grade levels and how the grade levels performed. And then we also take a look at that data by level. And what's really fascinating here is the percentage of students who exceeded that level 4 is actually higher than the amount of kids who exceeded it in ELA. But I think when you look at the numbers, it's the kids that are in that level 2 that have grown and that level 1 that have grown. So those are the areas that we're really focusing in on and really asking some questions about why might that be for those students. And then we also, once again, I did a comparison out to the DIRG. This has all been pulled off of the spreadsheet. And this is the data of how we performed within the DIRG. And then we also did it by grade level so that you could get a perspective of where we are from each of the grade levels. You'll see some of those dips, in particular grade 5, 6, and 7. And some of that has to do with even just the shift in the standards that are taught starting in grade 6. We shift to our 612 Common Core standards out of the 5th grade. But we're going to talk a little bit more about math in just a moment. But you can see, once again, for most of those districts, you're going to see the asterisk for the hybrid. So here's just a really important example of how COVID has impacted us from a mathematical perspective. So first of all, I just want to give big kudos to our curriculum leaders and administrators because really we took a systematic approach. when we knew that we went out onto remote instruction, it was really critical that all the curriculum coordinators were mapping out the units of study that were being taught during that remote time period. We needed to really keep track of that because we knew that it was going to have an impact. We knew that the way the students were learning was very different than the way that they were learning at school. And so here's just an example of one of the grade levels that we took a systematic approach. We did this for every single grade level, every single unit of study. We went back. We had to make decisions about some of the standards that we were going to teach, sticking high with the priority standards and pulling back on some of those secondary standards, because instructional time was impacted. So here we just kind of map us through taking a look at a 6th grader and now looking at them as current 9th graders. So when these students who are current 9th graders right now, and I only took us through the algebra track. So our students who enter into 9th grade, they could be in algebra, they could be in geometry, or they could be in algebra 2. So it just gives you a perspective of how we had to do this for multiple courses at multiple grade levels. So when you take a look at our 6th graders, that was a typical school year for them back in 2018. And then we moved into 7th grade, and they went into remote learning for 4 months. So we knew that it was going to impact the unit 4 that we taught, which was our proportional relationships. So when we look at that proportional relationships, we know that there's going to be certain concepts that are taught during that unit that are going to impact the next year of math. So they're going to learn percent equations, they're going to learn simple interest, they're going to learn scale factors, and all of this is going to be impacted as they move from 7th grade into 8th grade, and where we can track that is it's going to impact when they have to start learning about slope in 8th grade. So we knew all of that when we had to adjust our curriculum, but it was really critical that we wanted all of these students who are remote to have shared experiences, and that's that systematic approach. So every teacher was following the same path so that when our kids returned to school, we didn't have 7th graders that some had this and some had that and some had this. It was every single 7th grader that was in this math course was experiencing the same things as we were moving forward. And then when we got into 8th grade, even though they were back at school, they had hybrid learning until October. There were a variety of quarantines throughout the course of the year. And then the half-day Wednesdays did impact what we did instructionally. So just here is one example that we knew that Unit 1 got impacted as 8th grade, and that was our linear functioning unit. And so where that plays an impact is rational, irrational numbers, and the Pythagorean theory. When you move into algebra, that Pythagorean theory is then revisited, and you're using that by solving equations using that theory, and that's all about algebra. So then it was a matter of us sitting with the high school staff, because now we've transitioned these kids into 9th grade, and we had to talk with them about the impact of the kids that are in the variety of courses that they're starting in 9th grade and the impacts that they might be having and the material that they might have to review based on those impacts. And so it's been really a K-12 systematic approach. So this is just one example, but we've had to do this for all the courses that we're offering. We've had to do this for all the different grade levels. And so when I say we, I'm looking at a good majority of these people that are sitting behind me who really spent hours doing this and working with the people in their departments to deliver that out. And we're constantly going back and looking at our data teams that we run. So when we do unit assessments and district assessments, we have data teams, we have conversations to make sure that we're trying to close the gaps of areas that kids might have been impacted. So as you can imagine how the impact in mathematics might be a little bit more than ELA because it doesn't spiral as much as the ELA curriculum does. What's interesting, though, when we look at the ELA, there's some positive things that we've learned as well. So when we looked at a unit, 8th grade, their first unit of study on literature, we used to always assess the kids by having them do this long write on a narrative that they would have to do. And then what we decided to do was their assessment was going to be their annotation of notes. And so we really spent time teaching the kids how to take those annotated notes in 8th grade and how to scaffold. And then it wasn't until the second unit that they actually did the long write that they had to do for their assessment. And we got better results. So we're just now continuing to do that because we realize that there is a strategy in teaching kids how to do those annotated notes and then how to use those annotated notes to do your long writes. So there are a lot of perks as well. And now I'm just going to move shortly and briefly into next generation science assessment. So once again, that's administered to students in grades 5, 8, and 11. It's an online testing administration. We're using the same system that we use for Smarter Balance. And just like in Smarter Balance, there's a variety of different items, everything from multiple choice to open-ended to tables to graphs. We also have a Connecticut alternate science assessment that we're able to give to students who are cognitively disabled in students in grades 5, 8, and 11. So interestingly enough, the Next Generation Science Administration, we don't have as much data. So those of you that were on the Board of Ed will remember that we did a field test back in 17-18. Which is really tying back to when we were moving into all the next generation science standards that went into play back in 2015. And then we didn't have any results of the field test. It was just a field test. They were piloting the test. Our students participated, but we didn't receive any results on how our students did. And so the first operational year of that assessment was 2018-2019. And then 2020, no assessment, and then we were back to our assessment in 21. So the Next Generation Science Assessment, it engages the students in the 3 dimensions of science. So they're asked to do questions on the science, engineering, and practices, which is asking questions, it's analyzing data. The next dimension is the cross-cutting concepts, which looks at patterns and cause and effect. And then there's also the disciplinary, that's the 3rd dimension, which is your life science, physical science, earth, space science. So I'm not going to go too much into detail because Melinda Meyer and Michael LeDuc are planning to come back in December to do a presentation on the next generation science standards, and they'll be much more exciting than I would be in describing all those areas to you. So here, once again, are the results of our students. Actually, our students performed quite well for experiencing a pandemic. So our students, 88% of our students were above a 3 in 5th grade, and 81% of our students were above a 3 in 8th grade. And you can see that they did quite well in comparison to even how they performed in 2018 and 2019. And then once again, I did do the comparison out to the DIRG, just so that you could get a perspective of how our students performed in science and compared to other districts. And I have to say that I think Melinda and Michael and I have been getting lots of phone calls about our science curriculum and how we're addressing next generation science standards. But we do share. So once again, I just want to talk a little bit about the COVID implications for science as well, just to give you an example. First of all, when you look at our 5th graders from last year who took the test in 2021, they did their whole entire year on a cart. So most of what they were experiencing in the classroom was probably more 2-dimensional than 3-dimensional because you really couldn't do all the labs that we would constantly do. But we did the best with making it work for our students. In grade 4, they had 4 months of remote, and that was really different for every kid because in many cases we were hearing from families that it was really a struggle to get through just even the cores of reading and writing and math. So science was happening maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and some people even had to pull back from science because it was just becoming too overwhelming for some of their kids. And then their last normal school year was in 3rd grade. And then this year we have our 5th graders. And I think one of the things that we're noticing is some of the impacts is really it's that planning and conducting those investigations. When you think of like our current 5th graders and their last normal school year was 2nd grade, And then last year, they didn't touch materials. They all worked as individuals. So it's been very challenging reminding kids how to collaborate and share and problem solve and work together on those science experiments. So our fifth graders are kind of like, our fifth grade teachers are like, this is very different this year. But we have to keep reminding them that what their experiences were from years before. And then you can take a look at even how our sixth graders and looking at our eighth grade. So eighth grade, it's considered a core. So the kids were in a science classroom. They weren't on a cart, but once again, it was a modified classroom. So they weren't doing all those experiments. One of those units that we were talking about earlier was even that force and motion unit. So when you look at that, that was impacted because there was no space to test. Normally we have ramps and we have cars and they're doing the test to see like how fast the motion goes and they're using that, and we weren't able to do some of that last year. We also had to make some changes in the curriculum that we did. So an example here would have been like the climate. So not all kids will have that introduction to climate if they start with bio in ninth grade. So we had to make sure that that was taught in our seventh grade units. It was one of those things that we couldn't skip. It had to be an assured experience for our seventh graders because some of them won't go into, they'll start in bio instead of geophysical. And then the other pieces where we might have made some changes were the life sciences, because we know that they're going to have all those units of study as they move into high school. So once again, it's sitting and talking middle school to high school and talking about those transitions. Last slide. Next steps. So when we sit here and we continue to talk about our next steps, we're always progress monitoring our students through benchmark and district assessments. We conduct data teams to review the results on all the varied assessments. We review the data by grade level, by class, and by individuals. And then we create individual plans through our response to intervention, which is a whole nother presentation, which I won't share this evening because I'm sure you've heard enough of me speak. So I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Correnti. And I know there's going to be questions. I have some myself, but I just want to say thank you, to the curriculum leaders, to all the teachers and everyone that worked in our district during the last year and a half during COVID. We knew there would be a delay in some progress and some impacts, and it's remarkable to see our numbers and just to see how well we actually did during this and how much our students were able to progress. So I just want to say thank you and acknowledge that. And, I know that there's going to continue to be creativity, and I like what you said about the systematic approach in terms of how do we, bridge the gap. So I just wanted to add that, my thanks for all of you. Brendan, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I mean, I expected some impacts to the numbers, but they really didn't change as much as I would have expected, and we did really well relative to our peers. So congratulations on that. I just wanted to ask, and it may not be something that we want to cover tonight, but that we maybe talk a little bit about at some point how kids have, grown emotionally from the standpoint of dealing with all the issues that came with COVID. Not being able to see their friends, but persevering, learning how to listen online, those kinds of things. More difficult to measure, obviously, but it would be good to just understand how kids have grown through the pandemic in that way. They've obviously been impacted more negatively on the academic front, but it would be good to understand that piece.
Yeah, we have anecdotal data right now, and that's usually where you live when you're talking behaviorally and socially and emotionally about students. But we do have other data that we can also go through as far as number of risk assessments and other things that we're working with students through. I do think that chart that I shared with you is really powerful. Because we have to keep reminding our students, our teachers, that our students, that are our youngest students, they haven't had those normal school years. And so there's some things that they would have learned as kindergartners or learned as first graders, and now they're sitting in that second grade classroom and they don't necessarily remember. I remember talking, I think it was with Mrs. Murphy, who was talking even just about how the first grade teachers were like, the kids aren't walking in the hallway. They don't know how to walk in the hallway. And she's like, because they didn't walk in the hallway last year. Everything went to them, and the only time they ever left the classrooms was to go to the cafeteria or go outside for a mask break. But they didn't have to walk all the way up to the gym. They didn't have to walk all the way to the art room. So it's just some of those little things that we have to just keep reminding ourselves that we have to reteach our students. It's the same thing at Saks when we gave you that example of the first day of school and the sixth graders were all just standing at the front entrance. And we're like, welcome, welcome. It's so exciting to have you. And then they're all asking you, but I don't know where I'm supposed to go for Mandarin, or where am I supposed to go to the gym, or where am I supposed to go for band? Because we forgot as fifth graders, they didn't travel our building. So then you see Mr. Gussage and Ms. Dr. Fiera, and Mr. Bedard and Mrs. Obachowski just running the building. All right, who's got a foreign language? Follow me. Who's got band? Follow me. But it was, once again, you had to go back. But we can see the impact with that socially, emotionally, some of the social skills. So we'll be happy to give you some updates.
Thanks.
Other questions? I had a question, a couple questions. One was just going back to the SAT.
Yes.
That was news. I'm sure. When do you think New Canaan High School will decide when they're administering that test? Will that be I'm just questioning whether, the timing of the communication out to students and parents on that date.
So usually we do that in early January. We usually send that out to the parents and to the students, especially when we know what our plan is. So in the past, the way that we've run Connecticut SAT is we have the juniors come to school at 7:30 in the morning because the test is given from 7:30 to about 12, and then the other grades usually arrive later, although we've also done things with our senior internship program on that day, or we've done other activities for the different grade levels. But that's normally how we've run it. So right now we just have to try to do the inventory of the devices to try to see, can we actually test all of our juniors at once, or will we have to spread that out? So if we were to open up all of our labs that we have in existence here, and we were able to pull different laptops that we have available, will we be able to test the entire junior class in one sitting, or are we going to have to administer that over a couple days?
And my other question was somewhat related to your point about the technology. As you were going through examples from the Smarter Balance and the example from grade 5, I'm wondering, what is the impact of, increasing the use of technology in the classroom on a day-to-day basis now that we're one-to-one with preparations for taking these tests and these assessments that are now online, and now even the SAT is digital,
So we've seen some advantages because the kids can maneuver. They know how to go into split screens. They're really savvy, and they just quickly go into the split screens, and they've got the reading on one side, they've got the questions on the other. They've learned how to manipulate those computers so incredibly well. Where we've seen some downfall is in the editing, because the kids have lived in Google, and so they've gotten really savvy on how to edit their work. So all of a sudden, a little red squiggly line, I've got a spelling error, or I got to do a grammar check. And so they're editing all of their work that they're doing on the computer, and they're submitting it to their teachers. But when you're in the Smarter Balanced, those little red squiggly lines, they don't come up. So it's, once again, we see some impact in certain claims and certain target areas that we've been working with our kids on. The other piece that we always have to work on with reading is also to make sure that our kids don't skim read. So when they read on the computer, they tend to skim read versus read the entire thing. So they go over, and when those split screens happen, they see the questions, they look for the answers of the questions in the passage versus just reading the full passage. So it is some training that we've been working with our kids on. So we do a nice balance within our classrooms of the technology and still having the paper, pencil, and the books in front of them as well.
Got it. Thank you. It's helpful. Other questions? Brendan?
Yeah, just one more. Do we have, it seems like there are an increasing number of kids who might need intervention. So are we able to, get to all those kids kind of early in the school year? Is it just too much? Are we, refocusing certain people to help do that? How are we approaching that this year that might be different?
So we're very fortunate because we have some highly skilled reading specialists and math specialists in our elementary schools and our middle school. And remember, through the grant money, we also increased a few of our part-time people to full-time people. Those were also a math specialist and a reading specialist to support the kids over at Saks. We're still working really hard with the classroom teachers on that differentiation of instruction, because that's really where that tier 1 begins. It's noticing and recognizing through your unit assessment or your pre-assessment how you're going to have to differentiate the instruction for the students that are sitting within your classroom. So we're constantly balancing out those reading and writing specialists and math specialists. How much do they coach the teacher so that they can proactively differentiate right there on the spot? And then how much do they service kids in intervention? And so we do have a thorough response to intervention plan that we follow with the district. We're still continuing to follow that and working really hard at making sure we're meeting all those needs. And we really work hard to make sure that those reading specialists are well-trained. So we have as many of our reading specialists trained in Orton-Gillingham, similar to our special education teachers, so that we can try to help kids at those earliest levels to close any gaps that may be occurring with phonics or phonological awareness, and making sure that they make that growth. So even if I think we've, we're constantly monitoring how we're servicing. At the middle school, we also get pretty creative with the workshop block. And so sometimes we utilize just our regular classroom teachers to help out with intervention as well. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, just for my own edification, I'm curious why the science assessment is in grades 5, 8, and 11. Why is that not tested annually?
So that's just what the federal government decided, that they would test them 5, 8, and 11. I think they're always cautious about over-assessing students. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, when we first began the Smarter Balanced Assessment, there was a performance task in ELA. So there was a performance task in mathematics, and there was a performance task in ELA. We all loved the performance task in ELA because it was incredibly challenging. Kids were reading 2 to 3 different articles, and they had to do a comparison, and they had to do research. But we also discovered very quickly that it took a very long time to administer. And so then you have to balance out how much do you want to be instructing your students versus assessing your students. So I think they've always been very cautious about not overly assessing our students. And so that's why they pick 5, because in most districts, 5th is the ending grade for elementary schools. And so it's really an assessment of what kids learn K through 5. And that's really how that science assessment is built. It's all the skills that they have to learn in K through 5, and then they take the assessment. And then most middle schools end with 8th grade, and so it's really that accumulation of what they learn in 6th through 8th grade. And then once again, 11th grade has been the year because you want to make sure that they have a certain amount of sciences before they approach the NGSS in 11th grade.
And then just a couple more kind of easy ones here. Do we have the data going back before 2016, just out of curiosity? And are those historical averages roughly the same? I mean, kind of mid-80s or high 80s, is it all? I'm just curious if we have that data on hand.
Right, so there's a shift, and I just have to go back into my memory. I think 2015 might have been the first year that they took the Smarter Balance, and I'm not sure if those were results that were reported to us. So it was either 2014 or 2015. So prior to the Smarter Balance, we took what we called the Connecticut Mastery Test. And that was a paper pencil assessment. And then the Connecticut Mastery Test wasn't aligned to Common Core standards. And so they created a new assessment that was aligned to those Common Core standards, and that was the Smarter Balanced Assessment. And so there was a transition time between that 2014 and 2015. So there may not be scores reported out because it was those pilot years, similar to what I shared about the next generation science standards. Is that? Remember? I see lots of nods behind me, so I've still got my memory.
Thank you.
I just have one more question. So in summary, because you've been much closer to the data and it looks complex, I mean, are there some takeaways in terms of other curriculum areas or grade levels that require more attention or focus, or it just was just more complicated during the learning period, COVID? And you can answer that question another time if you're not.
No, I think that every grade level brought on unique challenges. So when we really are looking at every single grade level was so different. So when you think of your youngest learners and teaching your youngest learners to read, naturally having them in front of you is the best, so that they can hear and manipulate all of those sounds. And so certainly, did our teachers do the best with remote, doing our Foundations program remotely, but to do it in person, it's very different. So every grade level brought on unique challenges. So what we might find, as primary grades is going back and having to reteach some of those phonics skills that they should have received as first graders, but now they're getting them as second graders. So it's constantly closing that gap. And then as you move into all the different grade levels, you're going to have courses that get impacted. And so you can see where that will play a factor. But it's that communication, which is so critical, because if you're not communicating to the next grade level, then they're not going to have any idea, and they're just going to keep moving forward with how they've taught things in the past. Mm-hmm. And so that vertical alignment and working within that department from that vertical alignment is just huge. And it's really these curriculum leaders who have such a deep understanding of, okay, so this unit is taught in third, this is where they pick up in fourth, they missed this, we've got to circle back and make sure they get this in fourth grade. So everything was impacted through COVID. I can't say one particular grade level was impacted more than another. They were just impacted differently from what they learned at school.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Hi, a couple of probably easy ones. How come, do they not have a standard secure browser for like their own device? Or is that a requirement by College Board that they use a district device? I'm just curious.
It's the College Board requirement that they use the district device.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and I think some of it comes down to you have to actually load a secure browser onto the kids' devices. So several years back, we actually did a pilot with that with the Next Generation Science Assessment, where we actually allowed the kids to use their own devices, and we showed them and their parents how to load the secure browser onto the devices. Yeah. And then the day of the assessment, we had kids that said, oh, yeah, I kind of deleted that because my computer was moving so slowly. So then you're trying to reload it before the assessment took place. And so the state said, no, it's just so much easier when it's a district-owned device and you push it out and the whole computer gets locked down.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. And then on the scales, on, met and exceeded, how are those calculated? Because if like you can see that it's variable, right? It's not like is it recalculated each year?
So there's a cut score that they get, which goes back to that vertical score. So depending on where they score from the vertical score, it would put them either at the exceed or at the just approaching. And so we're always looking at the range that they're in as well, because when we I think it was 3 years ago, I did a whole presentation on that vertical growth, and I'd love to do that again next year to really explain how you have to look at that in order to the growth that you have to make in order to either maintain a 3 or to jump to that 4 level. So it goes by the vertical cut scores that they have for the students.
Right, but the scale's vertical across grades, right?
Yes, and they are required to make improvement each year, and there's a certain amount of growth that they have to make each year on each of those scaled scores.
So if you looked at like the last good year, which is 2019, and then look at 2021, is the growth, when we look at the growth over those 2 years, since it is a vertical scale, you should be able to estimate kind of where they should be. Did we see this, like, did kids end up where we expected them to?
Yeah,
I get it compared to others, but like compared to what the scale says.
Yeah, so actually they would. So like if you were looking at a 7th grader's vertical scaled score, in order to either be at the level 3 or the level 4, as an 8th grader, your vertical score had to be here. So the kids had to either make that growth in order to just stay at that level 3
Right.
or that level 4.
And do we see that for the most part?
We did, because
Yeah.
that's what shows us where those kids achieved that growth. Do we have kids that dropped? We do. And those
Yeah.
are the kids that we're really looking closely at. So it's really going back and analyzing that data.
And do we see like greater differences between genders at all?
We didn't really see a significant difference between our genders. And I know there's been lots of reports out there that the girls actually outperformed the boys
Yeah.
because they were better and more attentive during remote learning than the boys were. But we didn't see much of a difference with our gender, and I just don't know if that's just because we were in person more. But the differences with the gender has been very, very small and very similar to what it's been in the past.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, Julie and then Dan.
Hi. For your youngest learners, so for example, in third grade, the last normal year was in kindergarten. Have you had to have a lot of reading interventions for those young learners and learning how to read? What's the impact on them been?
So once again, it's looking at those individuals. So we do our universal screenings 3 times a year. And so one of the things that we continue to do with our youngest learners that I think is really helpful is about 2 years ago, we put in place Dibbles. And so Dibbles is a way that we measure their phonological and their phonics awareness in grades K through 2. And so by doing that, we were able to really track kids that were starting to slide and starting to fall through the cracks and trying to get them the intervention as much as possible. So that was a tool that we used early on in the fall of last year. So when the kids came back, we gave them that Dibbles. For kindergartners, it was a baseline. For first graders, it was, okay, where are you and what are we going to do to help to close any gaps? So we're always looking at those gap areas and trying to figure out how to close those. I don't have the actual intervention numbers right in front of me, but if I was to come back and do a response to intervention presentation, I'd be happy to bring those numbers and give you comparisons to where we were 2 years ago to where we are right now. But we have been working very hard to close those gaps for any of our kids that have been struggling with learning to read. I do have to say, I think our phonics program, our foundations program has been very helpful because that's truly giving them that foundation that they need in order to learn to read. And then obviously they switch over to reading for meaning when they hit that second grade. Comprehension's obviously always taught, but we focus a lot on those skills that they need to be fluent and accurate readers. So, but I'd be happy to get those numbers for you. I just don't have them off the top of my head.
Thank you.
So you talk a little bit about the other ways to assess student learning away from just the annual test, whether it's the district assessments, portfolios, progress monitoring. I guess it would be helpful to understand a little bit more at like your level and the administration level and the kind of curriculum coordinators, how both the testing results, but all those other things are kind of ported down to the teachers. And then also like how that kind of holistically is kind of communicated to parents. Just so that if there's things that either teachers or parents, can glean from the data as they work through each learner's kind of trying to either go from level 1 or 2 to 3 or 4 or even 3 to 4.
So certainly I'd be happy to talk about the different assessments that we do. I can, in mathematics, they do have unit assessments after every single unit that they teach in all of the grade levels. And then they have what they call benchmark assessments, and those are given 3 times a year. So right now they've just finished up benchmark assessments. And so when parents do those parent-teacher conferences in grades K through 5, they have an opportunity to kind of go through those benchmark assessments. We do send home cover sheets of how students perform on those benchmark assessments so that parents should be able to see what they're doing on those units. It also includes computation facts and other items. In reading, we have a wide variety of assessments as well. I just described the Dibbles. We also use our benchmark assessment system, which is where we can test our students on what levels they're reading and what ranges they're able to read in. And that's really important for instruction, because when we know that they are at a certain level reading, we know exactly what to instruct them in order to help them to progress. We have our foundations, so we have our unit assessments there as well. So we have a wide range of assessments. So usually it's that first marking period that all the teachers have recorded all those results, and we'll start going through all of those results with parents at that marking when they're sitting down with those report cards and talking about their child. And I think what's important too is obviously if there's anybody that they're concerned, we always ask the teachers to call the parents and let them know what's happening so that there's no surprises when they're receiving those report cards. And it's also talking about the instruction that they're giving to their children within their classrooms. And then we also have data teams. So after we do any kind of benchmark assessment, we come together as a data team and we sit and we analyze that data. So we not only talk about the data, how did all of the students in third grade do on the benchmark assessment in math, and then we dive into individual students. And so we have what we would expect the students to perform, and if they're not performing there, why are they not performing there, and what can we do to help them to be there? And so that really actually ties nicely into a response to intervention presentation. So I'd be happy to come back to the board at another time and do an in-depth. It would talk about our intervention numbers. It would talk about the assessments that we use regularly in our classroom to measure our students' growth over time.
Okay, great. And then as far as the actual state assessment tests, do you feel like there is a high, I would assume probably yes, but like a high correlation between these other assessments and where you generally have students either not meeting expectations or getting closer, exceeding, and the actual state results?
Yeah, so all of the state assessments are first of all aligned to the Common Core standards, and all of our curriculum is aligned to those standards. But usually there's not surprises. So usually when we get the results for the state assessment, we're usually not surprised where students are performing because our benchmark and our district assessments are pretty aligned with how we would expect our students to perform. That's not to say, are there surprises? There are, but we always need to remember that when you think of those state tests, they take an ELA assessment for 2 days. It's 2 hours of 60 minutes. So once again, a child could have severe allergies and they just don't perform well that day. And these are all kind of little notes that we do keep track of so that when the results do come back, you know, we'll say, oh yes, remember we spoke with Mrs. Smith and we talked about the allergies, and sure enough, Mrs. Smith, we call her and we remind her and she remembers of those allergies. So we do keep those little anecdotal notes as well.
And then lastly, for the kids that missed the science assessment in the 2019-2020 year, is there anything that you think that, like, I guess waiting 3 years till they get their next science assessment that you want to try and track in the interim, or is it just too hard because they missed it?
We actually just use our district assessments to track their performance and make sure that they're meeting those standards.
Okay. Thank you.
Erica.
I was wondering if, sorry, I had a couple of questions. One was looking at the students who have individual learning gaps and whether or not the approach is different based on whether or not the gap is attributable to an impact of a COVID impact during the year versus a gap that you would have traditionally seen.
So I think I'm understanding your question. So I think it's really about looking at the students who might not be performing and may already have, are you talking about a special education plan? Or are you talking about a response to intervention plan?
Any sort of an assessment that says that there's a gap there. It could be, you know, the SBAC or any assessment. Is some of those gaps are going to be attributable to COVID, but some of them are going to be, there would always be some learning gaps. And so is the approach different if it's related to COVID, to some of the impacted units from that you were not able to tackle during COVID?
Right. So part of our response to intervention is always to extend as much as we can within general education. So we're always looking at what can we do to make sure that it's not an instructional gap versus a child who might have a disability. And so that's part of our responsibility in general ed is to say, okay, so what can we do to exhaust all of the general ed services that we have to make sure that there's not an instructional gap going on, whether that be from COVID, whether that be that they just need something taught differently. So we know that about 80 to 85%, maybe even close to 90% of our kids will learn through our Foundations program. And then there's another 5% that just needed a little bit more systematic. And so they're going to need it from our reading specialist. And the reading specialist will instruct them a little bit differently than the instruction that they're getting in classroom, and hopefully help to close that gap so there's no instructional gap. And then there's going to be that 5 to 10% that, despite all the efforts of general ed, all that we've done to try to close that instructional gap, they're still not closing that gap. And then that's when they might get referred off to special education for full evaluations. And so we have a whole process that we follow. But we really are looking at the kids right now. It's, this is our fall benchmarks. This is where our kids are performing despite whether it was COVID or not. It's our responsibility to move them forward and take them forward.
All right. Dr. Crunty, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, that's right. Yes, thank you all for being with us tonight, and you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to go. So, thank you for being here. All right, next on our agenda is a COVID update. Dr. Letzi?
Yes, I will keep it as short as I can once again. I do want to just briefly share, and Dr. Crenty's data backs this up too, and you might assume it's the truth, but it's good to see the data backing this up, that the amount of time we spent in person last year, it was tough. It was a tough lift. We all know that. There were so many unknowns out there and everything else, but the fact that our curriculum team planned in advance and kept planning, and that our teachers came in, when they were willing and able to come into the classroom. We brought our kids back, as you know, in September and October. And when you look at the data that are there, as Jill and I were talking about it, some of those comparisons, they're the highest number in that district, whether it was not us in comparison to them, but, every district has a suite of data because they have in-person or hybrid or fully remote and all of that. So Jill put the highest number for each of the other represented districts because it just seemed like the right thing to do. But I think our numbers really do reflect that value that we got by being in person all the time that we were. So I think that's just a big takeaway. You asked about big takeaways that you see in the data. We're seeing that here. We're seeing that across the state. So it was a heavy lift, but it was worth all of it. And I think that's shown and backed up there. So just being very grateful to all of our leaders and our teachers and everyone too who made that happen. Hot off the press, just literally an hour before our meeting here, the CIAC and the Department of Public Health put out the COVID guidelines for winter sports. So I haven't had any conversations about this with anybody, but I just wanted to quickly give you the highlights here. In winter sports, beginning December 23rd of this year, they're making some changes where they're saying that masks will no longer be required in-game in basketball and hockey, indoor track while people are competing, when they're throwing or jumping or running. Students can remove their masks in competition if they're fully vaccinated. It says partially or unvaccinated participants have to wear their mask the whole time. They go on to say wrestling does not need to wear a mask, swimming and diving does not need to wear a mask, again, if fully vaccinated. And the same goes with cheerleading, dance, and gymnastics. And I think, they're trying to, of course, wrestling was never required because of a fear about the mask itself and choking, what have you. But they are acknowledging, I think, the uptick that we are experiencing, and that probably has something to do with the December 23rd date with this, because our spring sports season does start in winter sports season in the next couple of weeks. But I think it's a good sign. At least, they're working hard to try to moderate some of the guidance a little bit. So this is literally, just out, and they're talking about again, the fully vaccinated student athletes will be able to remove their masks when playing basketball and ice hockey and some of the other things. So we'll parse this more carefully, and I'll have more information for you again. Just literally received it via email from my drive from the central office to here and setting up for the meeting. So that's all I got on that. But more to come, but figured you might as well be the first to know. We are seeing a little bit of an uptick. It's not just us here in New Canaan. I think it is pretty broadly happening across the state. Governor Lamont's press conference today, he talked about it a little bit. Our vaccination rates are helping us. At our high school, when you take a look, we really have had very few needs to quarantine, and it's a flip. And we've said that from the beginning, where last year it was the high school folks and the kids, and they were driving our numbers. Now, because again, the vaccination rates, we don't need to do that. We have seen in the last couple of days typical patterns that we've seen before, which is family spread, right? So if somebody in the household has it, especially somebody younger, it's a lot easier to pick it up because, in the time that you're spending there. But Janet Reed and I and Jen Elson over in the health department continue to text multiple times throughout the day. Jen's actually on vacation this week, and she's probably sent me more texts than normal, just because that's just what it takes, right, as we're working through all of this. But we're being very careful around the students that we do have to quarantine, recognizing that, it's a significant impact. We did have an entire class at South that we had to quarantine last week, and that had to do, again, with a positive case in that class and just making a judgment call on that one. Turns out to be the right one, because there have been a couple of cases now that have come from that classroom. So, we're still, we're guided by the Department of Public Health, but really the decision-making flows from Jen, from Janet, who is our head nursing supervisor. From time to time, we'll reach out to Dr. Pierce, who is our district medical advisor, and trying to, again, continue to navigate all of these things together. The last piece simply is that with Thanksgiving coming up, I'll be sending out a brief note, of course, of thanks and gratitude, but also a reminder about travel. The CDC does still recommend that unvaccinated people who travel do quarantine for 7 days when they return, with a test out after the third day. So they ask that people do, if you do travel unvaccinated. Now that we have said that we've not made this a hard and fast rule, because we also know that not all travel is the same. And there are families that may be traveling to go to a place where they're staying together, and they're being careful. They're not necessarily interacting with folks who might be at higher risk of transmission. Of course, where you go matters too, right? There's different parts of the country and parts of the world that have more COVID than others. So we ask folks to be aware of the guidelines, to consider them, and we also want to encourage people, if they do need to be tested when they come back, they can reach out to the health department. There are lots of opportunities to do that. Jen's still running clinics twice a week, and the school district is helping with that, because we are actually transporting those samples over to the clinic, and we've been doing that for over a year now. So it's a good partnership with the town and with the district to do that. But we ask people to be aware of those CDC guidelines as they consider Thanksgiving travel. And I go on, but I won't, because it's Thanksgiving week. And we all have been talking about this for a long time. So the last thing I guess I'll say is, in many of the conversations that I have, we talk about not necessarily return to normal, but how do we make what comes next better than what we've had, right? And I think as a district, I'm very proud of the fact that we've never resigned ourselves to create simply a pale replica of what kids would have had without COVID. But as you heard in the presentation tonight, and he's talking to different people, we've continued to try to create something new and better for kids, and tried to seize upon windows of opportunity when they presented themselves, so that our kids could have the experiences and our families could be a part of that. And we are starting to open up more and more with some volunteerism and some other things at the different levels with our principals. And as long as locally our trends continue, or I'm anticipating they'll improve, but as long as we can keep things safe here in our schools, we're going to continue doing that more and more.
Great news. Thank
Okay.
you. Questions, comments? Okay. We have an action item tonight from the All Sports Booster Club. Are you presenting this?
Could I?
Yep, please do.
Sure. So we have the really good fortune here, and Jay Egan is our athletic director, can talk in more detail. I'll give you the quick thumbnail, but instead of having a booster club for each sport, which is sometimes the case in different places, years ago, Jay consolidated that under the All Sports Booster Club. And what this does is sort of have a clearinghouse for donations and for contributions into our program that then Jay can work with the chair to be sure that it's equitably dispersed and that it's done in all the right ways as far as the contribution into the school. So instead of each little group giving some money here and there for different things, Jay actually takes in the money and can channel that money to the area of greatest need, always keeping Title IX and equity needs in mind as he looks across. So we have our partners with the All Sports Booster Club. I mean, they really help us to make our athletics programs what they are. And as you've seen here, they really do focus on lowering the coach to athlete ratio, which allows our athletics program to become more than just kids on a field, but it becomes instructional. Kids really it helps them to develop those skills. And you can see here, just for the fall season alone, the All Sports Booster Club donation of $48,248.76, which is kind of a funny number, but it's aligned with our stipend amounts for coaches as well. So another thing that can happen if you don't have this kind of control over it, coaches can start making different amounts of money based on different groups, but we don't do it that way because Jay makes sure that these coaches that are receiving their money from the All Sports Booster Club are tied to the classes that we have in our contract. That's the class 5, 4, 3. And it's the same amount that the district pays coaches that are district funded. So this money is taken in by us, and then it's paid out to those coaches directly through our business office. And I just can't say enough about the positive impact that the All Sports Booster Club has on our programs.
Yeah, I would echo that they're a group of parents. They work much like the PTCs and the PFAs, and they work group of, they do a lot of fundraising, and they would just work really hard throughout the year. And I know this time of year, they're especially busy with the distributing the hottest ticket in town to the Turkey Bowl. Booster Club membership has never been more valuable. So
That's right.
yeah.
And if you're at the Turkey Bowl and you look up and you see that beautiful scoreboard, know that the All Sports Booster Club did the fundraising for that. That's just one of many, many contributions.
Great. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to accept the donation of $48,248.76 from the New Canaan All Sport Booster Club. First, Brendan. Second, Dan. All in favor? All right, unanimous support. Thank you. Thank you, Booster Club. Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, moving on. Announcements and future business.
Yep, just very briefly, our next meeting will be December 6th, which is 2 weeks from tonight. And we will have the 9 through 12 assessment report, which is a great opportunity to ask Bill Egan more about the SAT and anything else that you'd like to ask. So you've got a copy of that, I think, from a couple of weeks ago. I'll ask him if there have been any changes, and if so, I'll make sure that you get it.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, I will propose a motion to move into executive session. Our board will go into executive session, joined by our first selectman, Mr. Moynihan. So with that, is there a motion for proposed adjournment into executive session for confidential discussion of a potential real estate transaction? Brendan, second. Dan, all in favor? Okay, all right, thank you.
Great, thanks.